It isn't often that I have the privilege of introducing a scholar as well known and renowned as the one we will have this evening to introduce to speak to you on a, and it's the same title of his book. If you don't know what the title of his book is, buy it, and then you'll find out. So it's a pleasure at this time. I'm not going to read the history here, because we'll be here all night to read the accolades and the history behind J. Lu. So at this point, I want you to give a very warm welcome to J. Lu, who will be speaking to you, and he will announce the title. Jay, please. You see, you're younger than I am. You can do that. I can't.
Mr. and Mrs. Ted Anderson, officers and members of Friends of Taiwan, guests, fellow Americans, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm delighted to have this opportunity to address such a distinguished group. First of all, I'd like to salute the Friends of Taiwan for so many years of dedication in support of Taiwan's freedom. I share your love of America as well as concern for Taiwan's future. So I feel that I am among friends. The topic of my speech today is America's security and Taiwan's freedom. As Ted mentioned, it's the same as the title of the book I published a couple of years ago. The speech has 5 segments, and let me maybe just kick them off so while you're listening to me, you have an idea, what I'm talking about. The first section is appeasement of China will endanger U.S. homeland security. And second, abandonment of Taiwan will lead to geostrategic disaster. And third, the relevance of Taiwan's democracy. And fourth, the gathering crisis in the Taiwan Strait. And lastly, how can the U.S. safeguard Taiwan's freedom? And I will just conclude with a few remarks on that. First, why appeasement of China will endanger U.S. homeland security? George Washington University professor of political science, Charles Glazer, published a paper in the spring of last year proposing ways by which the U.S. can avert war with China. According to Glazer, prospects for avoiding war between the U.S. and China are good. Massive conventional Chinese assault on the U.S. homeland is virtually impossible due to the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean and vice versa. Even if Chinese power were to surpass U.S. power in the future, the U.S. can deter Chinese nuclear attack by maintaining survivable retaliatory nuclear forces. The U.S. will have the option of not responding to China's modernization of its nuclear force. This restraint will make China feel more secure, thereby enhancing U.S. security. Glazer believes war with China, but war or peace is shaped by general patterns of international politics, as much as idiosyncratic factors such as China's unique qualities, past behavior, and economic trajectory. But his discussion focuses narrowly on national security concerns by ignoring China's history, its economic policy, domestic politics, and other relevant factors, and applying international relations theory in an oversimplified manner. Glaser arrives at policy prescriptions which will increase the chance of a nuclear attack on the U.S. homeland, the exact opposite of his objective. Glaser analyzed Sino-U.S. relations solely on the basis of national security. In fact, Sino-U.S. relations have many facets: economic, political, and military. Focusing on military issues alone has led to misreading of Chinese intentions. China is offering its model of governance and development, a combination of managed capitalism and one-party authoritarianism, as a more efficient alternative to Western-style free market economy and democracy. China expends vast sums of money in this ideological competition, including funding of dozens of Confucius Institute on U.S. college campuses and the publication of the Chinese Communist Party CCP paper, The Global Times, in the United States. China implements a mercantilist trade policy, artificially sets a low value on its currency to promote exports, thus creating a large U.S. trade deficit with China year after year. This Blvd naval policy has resulted in steady transfer of U.S. wealth to China and U.S. indebtedness. China keeps growing. China is aided in this effort by U.S. multinational corporations and Wall Street firms, which are lured by the vast Chinese market and China's cheap labor. The People's Liberation Army, or PLA, has been modernizing at a rapid pace. China's defense spending has increased by double-digit percentages annually since the early 1990s. The PLA has mastered the C4ISR, that is command, control, communication, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance system of joint force fighting. Its modernization is not limited to the development of anti-access and area denial weapons and strategy against U.S. forces, but also capacities in cyber war and space war. Can you hear me back there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The PLA has demonstrated its ability to shoot down U.S. military satellites. In cyber warfare, the wartime objectives include paralyzing an adversary's information and communication systems, destruction of financial data, and infrastructure such as power grids and water supplies. One expert has recently observed that the U.S. is losing in this covert cyber war with China. Given China's multi-pronged efforts to compete with and catch up with the United States, it is not prudent to blithely assume that China's economic development will inevitably be followed by political liberalization, or that China's intentions will always be peaceful. By excluding Chinese history from his analysis, Glaser also misjudges the motives behind China's behavior. China's military modernization is not primarily motivated by its insecurity, as Glaser asserts. China is not threatened by the U.S. or any of its neighbors. The CCP abhors Western democracy as alien to Chinese culture and contrary to Chinese imperial and hierarchical tradition, which posits that China is the middle kingdom destined to rule all barbarians, that means all non-Chinese states. China's national mission is to regain its rightful place as the dominant superpower, so the nation may cleanse itself of the humiliation at the hands of the West for a century after the Opium War. This strident nationalism is nurtured by patriotism education fed to every school child and reinforced by the media's anti-Japanese and anti-American reporting. This is why the PLA has been modernizing at a furious pace. Beijing also wants to develop the capacity to overwhelm Taiwan's defenses rapidly before the U.S. can intervene. In his analysis of the U.S.-China relations, Glaser also ignores China's social instability. There's widespread resentment of the CCC government due to official corruption, environmental degradation, and confiscation of rural land with token compensation. In 2005, there were 87,000 cases of social unrest. During the first 7 months of last year, there have been 180,000 riots. In the 2011 budget for the People's Armed Police exceeded that of the PLA for the first time. In dealing with Beijing, we should not assume that the CCP is equivalent to the nation of China, or that the CCP regime will last for many decades. To avoid war with China, we need to steer China towards political freedom, rule of law, and democracy. A government which is held accountable by the electorate is more likely to improve the people's livelihood and less prone to military aggrandizement and territorial expansion. Glaser asserts that China has limited territorial aims, and therefore concession on territory China regards as its core interest will assure peace. In reality, China has expansive territorial ambitions, and unilateral concessions will be conducive to war by whetting China's appetite. Historically, China has always followed a policy of territorial expansion when it was more powerful than its neighbors. During the reign of the Qing Dynasty Emperor Kangxi, Chinese territory encompassed Outer Mongolia and a vast expanse of present-day Far Eastern Russia. And China exercised suzerainty over Korea, Indochina, and parts of Taiwan. Today, China claims virtually the whole South China Sea as its core interest, even though the islands they are in are also claimed by neighboring nations. China has a dispute with Japan over the Senkaku Islands and with India over Arunachal Pradesh and parts of Kashmir. Once a PLA admiral suggested to the head of the U.S. Pacific Command that the U.S. should retreat to Hawaii and leaving the Pacific Ocean west of that island to Chinese control. The rise of China poses great challenge. Challenges not only to U.S. national security, but ultimately to America's survival as a fully independent democratic nation. To keep the peace, the U.S. must face this reality, discard the culture of excessive deference to Beijing's wishes, and implement policies to maintain military superiority, both conventional and nuclear, including cyber war and space war capabilities. Reduce the persistent trade deficit and stanch the flow of U.S. wealth to China. Steer China towards democratization by engaging Chinese civic groups which favor democracy, and by preserving Taiwan's freedom as a model for China to follow. Strengthen regional alliances, particularly with Japan and South Korea, and engage China in economic and strategic dialogue to promote fair trade and to avoid misunderstanding. Next, I talked about why abandonment of Taiwan will lead to geostrategic disaster. On Taiwan, Glaser says that a crisis over Taiwan could easily escalate the nuclear war, and the U.S. should back away from its commitment to Taiwan. Such accommodation would smooth the way for better relations with China, quote, in the decades to come, unquote. It was this controversial proposal which triggered vigorous rebuttals from many scholars. Glaser writes that although it lost control of Taiwan during the Chinese Civil War more than 6 decades ago, China still considers Taiwan to be part of its homeland. This statement is puzzling. Is Glaser aware that the Beijing government has never ruled Taiwan? Taiwan was ceded to Japan in perpetuity by China in 1895. In the 117 years since then, Taiwan was ruled by a central Chinese government for only 4 years, from 1945 to 1949. While Chiang Kai-shek's troops occupied the island on behalf of Allied forces at the end of World War II, in the 1951 San Francisco Peace Treaty, Japan merely gave up its title to Taiwan and no beneficiary was named. It is the official position of the U.S. that the international status of Taiwan is still undetermined. Thus, the Republic of China, or ROC government, which rules Taiwan, has no sovereignty over Taiwan and the pescadores. China's claim on Taiwan is weak on both historical and legal grounds. The vast majority of the 23 million residents of Taiwan regard themselves as Taiwanese, and they overwhelmingly reject Chinese annexation of the island. The Taiwanese have built a thriving democracy through the sacrifice of tens of thousands of lives over many decades, and they would be loath to lose their freedom. China wants to acquire Taiwan for two main reasons. Taiwan's democracy is a threat to the CCP's autocratic and repressive rule. China needs Taiwan as a military base from which to project power into the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Taiwan's situation is precarious. The military balance has clearly shifted in favor of China. Hu Jintao's term as China's president ends in March next year, and he wants to complete the annexation of Taiwan by then or soon thereafter. The ruling Kuomintang, or KMT, under President Ma Ying-jeou is actively collaborating with the CCP to accomplish this goal by signing a peace accord with Beijing. Because the KMT controls both the executive and legislative branches of government and the mass media, Taiwan's citizens have little leverage to resist this momentum towards absorption by China. If Taiwan were to fall by PLA coercion or internal subversion, the U.S. would suffer a geostrategic disaster. The sea lanes and airspace around Taiwan are critical to the survival of Japan and South Korea. Once in control of Taiwan, China would be in a position to pressure Japan and South Korea to become its vassal states. With the demise of the U.S.-Japan military alliance, the U.S. would be forced to retreat all the way back to Hawaii. With the combined strength of the world's second and third largest economies, it would not be unrealistic for China to aspire to become the world's greatest superpower within 2 decades. The acquisition of Taiwan will propel China towards expansionism and eventual conflict with the United States. Taiwan's security is ultimately America's security as well, to quote late New York Congressman Gerald Solomon. Next, I'd like to discuss why Taiwan's democracy is important. In the past 3 decades, successive U.S. presidents have adopted a policy of engagement with China, opening our market to Chinese products, thus enabling China's rapid economic growth, and embracing the People's Republic as a member of the civilized community of nations, thus enhancing the legitimacy of the CPC rule in the eyes of the Chinese citizens. This policy is based on the theory that economic reform will inevitably lead to political liberalization and democratic transformation in China. A democratic China will be friendly towards the U.S. and will not pursue expansionist policy towards its neighbors. Therefore, the U.S. should welcome the emergence of an ever more powerful China. This theory, however, this theory of a benign China is not panned out. China now claims virtually the whole South China Sea as its territory and core interest. Beijing continues to imprison hundreds of thousands of political dissidents, including Nobel laureate Liu Xiaobo. The CCP abhors democracy as its nemesis, a fact which is amply demonstrated by the Tiananmen Papers. The CCP abhors democracy for several reasons. First, democratization means the demolition of the party's Leninist monopoly of power, whereby the ruling elite and cadres can enrich themselves at the expense of ordinary citizens. Second, once the grip on governmental means of coercion is lost, emboldened citizens would demand settlement accounts for the party's past sins. For example, the tens of millions of Chinese who perished during the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Third, the CCP is convinced Western democracy is incompatible with Chinese culture. And finally, the CCP believes its socialist government is more efficient in achieving national goals, such as economic growth, building a powerful military, and ultimately world domination. During the 2007 session of the National People's Congress, Premier Wen Jiabao said China will remain at the present primary stage of socialism, during which it would require guidance by the CCP for at least another 100 years. The preservation of Taiwan as an independent democracy is in accord with the interests of the United States and its democratic allies in Asia, precisely because Taiwan's democracy is a thorn in the side of the CCP. Taiwan is a beacon of hope for those Chinese who aspire to a more open society, with rule of law, freedom of expression and religion, in which people can freely elect their officials and representatives at all levels of government. Taiwan's experience disproves the fallacy that democratic values are incompatible with Asian culture. An independent Taiwan hinders China's projection of power into the Pacific and Indian Oceans and safeguards the vital sea lines of communication for Japan and South Korea. So the preservation of Taiwan's freedom contributes directly to the peace and stability of East Asia and beyond. Now, in the Taiwan Strait, there is a gathering crisis. According to Chinese jurist and writer Yuan Hongbing's book, titled The Taiwan Crisis, China's plan to annex Taiwan without a battle by 2012. Former Paramount leader Deng Xiaoping recorded a secret political will before his death regarding Taiwan. The most critical crucial section reads, quote, advocates of freedom in the bourgeois class are itching to follow the so-called Taiwan experience. Settling the Taiwan problem directly affects the viability of the Chinese Communist Party and socialism in China. The Taiwanese problem must be resolved by the end of Comrade Hu Jintao's second term. Do not go beyond the year 2012. I hope the 18th Party Congress will also be able to celebrate the resolution of the Taiwan problem, unquote. In February 2008, the CCP held a joint meeting of the Politburo and the Central Military Commission at the Strategic Command Center deep within a cabin in Beijing's Xishan district. At this meeting, Hu Jintao presented a top-secret report about China's historical mission. Here are some excerpts. Quote, historically, the West used battleships and opium to colonize China. Now the roles are reversed. We will seize the opportunity that capitalism's economic crisis has presented us with. Through the opening up policy, we will gradually make them socialist China's economic and cultural colonies. Ultimately, we must free all of mankind through communism. Solving the Taiwan problem is the first step we must take to fulfill our mission. If we do not end the Taiwan problem, opposition activities attempting to topple our socialist government within and outside the country will run rampant. Hence, quickly resolving the Taiwan problem is essential to keeping socialism in China alive and to keeping the party in power. End of quote. Hu Jintao's term of office as party secretary ends at the end of this year, and as chief of state by March 2013. He has a great incentive to achieve the annexation of Taiwan to glorify his legacy. His chances look good too, since the military balance across the Taiwan Strait has clearly shifted in favor of the People's Republic of China, PRC, and Taiwan's economic dependence on China has expanded dramatically under the aegis of Ma Ying-jeou's administration. Beijing is pressing Taiwan's ruling Kuomintang or KMT party to start political talks on how to implement unification. Many Taiwanese will favor preserving Taiwan's democracy and its de facto independence from China, pin their hopes on the victory by the opposition Democratic Progressive Party in the January 2012 presidential election. A DPP victory in that election was critical to Taiwan's freedom because a defeat could be misinterpreted as an endorsement by a majority of voters of the KMT's unification agenda. As it turned out, the Obama administration took active steps to ensure it favored Ma Ying-jeou's re-election, presumably because Ma is better able to reduce tensions between Taiwan and the PRC. Ma won the ROC presidency by 500,000 votes, a smaller margin than in 2008. Since his re-election, Ma has intensified his efforts to turn Taiwan into part of a de facto one China. The measures include downgrading of Taiwan's international status, dismantling Taiwan's democratic institutions such as freedom of speech and assembly and judicial independence, facilitating the growing outflow of Taiwan's capital, technology, and trained manpower to China, and enfeebling Taiwan's military forces. In the face of such development, how will the U.S. deal with Taiwan? Recently, there have been debates among U.S. academics and retired officials about whether to abandon Taiwan and even whether to retreat from Asia and to protect the U.S. homeland through offshore balancing, that is, withdrawing the forward deployed forces from East Asia and revoking alliances. So it is reassuring that former U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates emphasized the U.S. commitment to maintain a robust military presence in Asia at a meeting with Asian defense ministers and military commanders at Singapore on June 4, 2011. Even in the face of constraints on military spending, Gates said the Defense Department would find money for, quote, air superiority and mobility, long-range strike, nuclear deterrence, maritime access, space and cyber, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. To address the prospect that new and disruptive technologies and weapons could be employed to deny U.S. forces access to key sea routes and lines of communication. Supporting and cooperating with Japan and South Korea to maintain the peace and stability of East Asia is essential to U.S. military, economic, and diplomatic presence in the region. But can this goal be achieved without preserving Taiwan's status quo? As seen above, Beijing sees the conquest of Taiwan as the first step in its hegemony over Asia and ultimately dominance of the whole world. How can the U.S. safeguard Taiwan's freedom? First, the U.S. should make clear its position that the so-called Republic of China, that the Republic of China government has no legitimate sovereignty over Taiwan under its laws, that the legal status of these islands is in abeyance. Some people argue that because Taiwanese elect the president of the ROC directly, the ROC has gained sovereignty over Taiwan. This is not the case. The ROC is an exiled government of China, which is now ruled by the PRC government. What the Taiwanese voters confer on the ROC government is merely an interim power to administer the affairs of the island, not the authority to determine the legal status of Taiwan. That authority resides with the people of Taiwan under the universally accepted principle of self-determination. So a referendum on the future of Taiwan cannot be conducted by the ROC government under a law of its creation. The ROC is an alien government imposed on the Taiwanese by coercion, including a 38-year period of martial law. The democratization of the island has not changed that fact. Second, Washington should reiterate the U.S. policy that the future of Taiwan must be resolved peacefully and with the express assent of the Taiwanese people. To this end, the U.S. needs to consider organizing a consortium of disinterested nations to conduct and supervise a referendum on, so the Taiwanese can freely choose their destiny without any domestic or outside pressure. The U.S. has a moral obligation to intercede in this fashion because it was the U.S. forces which liberated Taiwan from Japanese colonization in 1945. Third, the U.S. administration should work with Congress to speed up the sale of advanced fighters and other weapons useful in resisting a PLA invasion of the island. Such action would send a message to Beijing that Washington intends to abide by the Taiwan Relations Act, or TRA, and that the U.S. has not decided to let the 23 million Taiwanese people fall under the CCP's oppressive rule. It will also boost the morale of the Taiwanese to continue fighting for their freedom. Fourth, Washington should initiate high-level contacts between the militaries of the U.S. and Taiwan to boost Taiwan's morale and readiness and to help counter any subversive activities within Taiwan. Such exchanges could include patrols by U.S. Navy ships. Lastly, bolstering of U.S. military presence in the Western Pacific, as mandated by TRA and by President Obama's pivot to Asia policy, should anticipate potential Taiwan contingencies. Both Deng Xiaoping and Hu Jintao grasp the political and strategic value of Taiwan to China's expansionist ambitions. Hopefully, the U.S. leaders will also recognize the importance of Taiwan to America's standing in the world and will adopt timely measures to foster a seminal geostrategic disaster for the United States. To conclude, there are great forces which shape world events, such as the spread of democracy after World War II and the rise of China and its strident nationalism, and the revolution of rising expectations in the Islamic world. The U.S. can try to channel these forces toward the direction of peace and freedom, but we cannot always control them. I believe the U.S. can be most effective when we hold fast to our founding principles, that freedom and democracy are universal values, that as Americans we have a responsibility to build a world which is safe for democracy. In that spirit, we need to ensure the Taiwanese people's right to determine their own future and help protect Taiwan's security. In so doing, we will ultimately be enhancing America's homeland security. Taiwanese Americans have a special responsibility to explain to our fellow Americans the grave threat to the U.S. posed by a rising China, because we have deeper knowledge of Chinese history and culture, and even personal experience with the darker side of Chinese culture. God bless America. God bless Taiwan.